Check. Alrighty, everyone. See that 4 people are logged in right now. All right, can you guys just type in a comment if you do, if you are able to hear me and see me correctly? Is that good for you guys? Yes? No? Awesome. Okay, cool. And the voice is also good. It's a good volume. All right, awesome. Okay, so thank you guys for joining me on a Sunday night before your exam. We're going to be going over the endocrine system. And this is the first time I do this, so please bear with me. And thank you so much for still coming through, even though it was half an hour late because of the internet issues. So I was going to go through some of the stuff from Complete Anatomy, as well as go through the lecture chapter page by page. So if you guys want to follow through with the book, I really recommend that. And, you know, we're going to get through this entire system as quickly as we possibly can. So before we get started, the first thing that we need to know is what is the function of the endocrine system? And now we've kind of touched on it already in class. You guys should already have an idea of what an endocrine gland and therefore the endocrine system would be doing. But just to kind of get an overview of how the system plays into the overall body, let's just take a step back. So the last thing we went through was the nervous system. And like the nervous system, the endocrine system's importance lies in its ability to create communication. So there's communication happening in the nervous system through electrical impulses that are being propagated across axons, and these are happening through action potentials. And those action potentials, we've gone into the details of how they are initiated, how they're propagated, how they're communicated from one neuron to another effector. And it could be a synapse with another neuron, a muscle, a gland. And in this case, there is some communication between the nervous system and the endocrine system by this last type of connection, which is between a neuron and a gland. So there are different types of glands that we have in our body, and endocrine is one of them. And the special thing about the endocrine system and therefore the endocrine glands is that we have ductless glands that are going to secrete hormones into the bloodstream and allow for these signals to be moved through chemical means, because these hormones are chemicals. So at the most basic level, if I was going to explain it to a 6-year-old, I would have to tell them that we have electricity moving through our body with a nervous system, and then we have chemicals moving through our body through the endocrine system. And the way that they both are going to be maintaining our homeostasis, or this balance, this delicate balance that we have, is through its, so for the nervous system, it's through this electricity, and then for the endocrine system, it's by being able to understand the changes in the body chemically and feedback on that, provide some kind of response to whatever changes could be going on in the body, in the same way that the nervous system would be able to do that. And we could return to homeostasis by that simple means of being able to interpret that there is a change that has happened and being able to correct it by secreting the necessary chemicals to return the body to a state of balance. Now, for the rest of the semester, we're going to figure out how these individual organs normally function in the state of balance, homeostasis, as well as, and right now we're saying, how can we change that normal function so that it is a dynamic equilibrium? So something has changed and we have positive or negative feedback, and that causes the body to want to change the function of these organs and organ systems. So let's go back to what's the difference in the types of messaging that we can have. So we have nervous messaging, which is going to be synaptic communication. Then we have endocrine, which is going to be when a certain chemical or hormone is going to be secreted from a gland which is ductless straight into the bloodstream. And from the bloodstream, it will circulate through the body. And so unlike the nervous system, it's going to take some time to go out, but then the effect is going to be longer in duration, and it's going to have a longer impact. So endocrine signaling is this type of ductless gland system that we have in our body that allows us to do this. This is different than exocrine, because instead of endo, we are going to be secreting hormones through ducts. So this includes our sweat glands. These include our testes. These include other organs in our body that are going to be secreting it outside of the surface into, let's say, our skin, for instance. So this is an exocrine type. The transmission of a message through extracellular fluid. And lastly, and this is going to be close to para. So they're parallel, they're close to it, and they're able to then send it out in just one moment. So we also have, lastly, autocrine, where you have a signal that's going to be sent out and exact cells that actually secreted it. So it's going to go to the extracellular fluid and then attack a receptor that's found on the cell and cause this change to the exact cell that secreted the signal in the first place. So auto, like automatic, it's the self-signaling. So now that we understand the differences between an endocrine type system and an exocrine type system, now we can start to look at what specifically is happening at each of these glands, and also look at the types of hormones that are going to be secreted back and forth into the bloodstream. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to switch off to complete anatomy and have you guys take a look at the 3D animation of what the body is going, how the endocrine system is organized in your body. So let me switch over to that for you guys.
In this lecture, I will provide you a brief introduction into the endocrine system. We'll describe the general functions, and in a later lecture, we'll look at the individual glands that are within the endocrine system. So let's quickly look at the functions of the endocrine system. So the endocrine system, which consists of these glands that you can see here on the model, the main function of these glands within the endocrine system is largely to help maintain homeostasis in the body. And it does so by releasing what are known as hormones. So as something is changing in the external environment, the internal environment will tend to change to react to that, and these endocrine glands will release hormones to bring you back to this state of equilibrium or homeostasis. Now, endocrine glands and the endocrine system in general releases the hormones from the gland and then allows those hormones to quickly disperse throughout the body by utilizing the circulatory system in the blood vessels within it.
All right, guys. So that's the very basic assessment of the different glands. I want you guys to pay attention to the positioning of each. So I'm switching back now.
In this lecture, I will take you through some of the major endocrine glands, and I'll tell you where they're located. In another important concept, we're going to describe the difference between an endocrine gland and an exocrine gland. So let's begin by looking at some of the major endocrine glands in the body. And I'd like to start by looking at the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is a part of what's called the diencephalon up here. And when you think of the hypothalamus, you can kind of think of this as the leader of the endocrine system. Now, remember from the previous lecture in the introduction to the endocrine system, I described the fact that the endocrine system functions to help maintain the body's equilibrium or homeostasis. So this means that oftentimes the hypothalamus will be constantly monitoring the body for any changes away, whether in a positive or a negative direction, away from that equilibrium. And you can see here that the pituitary gland is connected via this stalk to the hypothalamus. And the reason that is because the pituitary gland is considered the master, quote unquote, endocrine gland. So the hypothalamus detects a change, and oftentimes it will tell the pituitary gland to release a hormone into the body's bloodstream. And this helps us reiterate the fact that the endocrine system consists of glands that release substances called hormones, which is then brought up into the circulatory system and allows it to then travel throughout the body to create a response to help bring us back to that homeostasis level. So now let's look at some other glands. The thyroid gland, one of its prominent endocrine hormones is thyroid hormone. We have the parathyroid glands, where it produces a parathyroid hormone. Just above the kidneys here, one of their prominent hormones is epinephrine, or you tend to think of as adrenaline. The pancreas and the testes, we can see here, are unique in a certain extent in that they consist of both an endocrine function and an exocrine function. So this brings us to a good point to distinguish between what an endocrine gland does versus an exocrine gland. So as I mentioned earlier, all of these endocrine glands we discussed produce a hormone, which is then brought up by the circulatory system and distributed throughout the body. The testes do this by releasing something like testosterone. And the pancreas releases a substance most of you have probably heard of called insulin, which are brought up into the bloodstream and do various changes throughout the body so they can distribute throughout. The testes and the pancreas also have a series of ducts, which takes a different or separate substance, and instead of taking it into the bloodstream, the duct takes the substance produced and delivers it onto the surface of something. So, for instance, the testes are where sperm are created. So sperm travels from the testes out and then eventually through the urethra of the penis. The pancreas produces digestive enzymes, which go from the pancreas directly into the small intestine. So we have a duct that takes them from an organ out to the surface of some structure. And we'll look more in depth at the exocrine system and their glands in a minute, but I thought this was a good time to distinguish between endocrine and exocrine. So to summarize, endocrine glands, like the ones we can see here, produce a substance called hormones, which release the hormones out into the bloodstream, which allows it to easily travel throughout the body, versus exocrine glands produce a substance which then utilizes a duct or a tube-like structure to deliver that substance onto the surface of some part of the body.
All right, awesome. So now you guys have a very, very brief overview of what the anatomy of the endocrine system would look like. Hello, Matthew. And we're going to go piece by piece now and look at each organ and describe its function. So if you guys want to follow along, I'm on page 597 of your textbook. So first of all, let's start with the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is really the brains of this operation, quite literally. So it's an anatomical structure that's found in your brain, and it's going to be below the thalamus, hence the name hypothalamus. And then it's going to be the point where the nervous system and the endocrine system are actually integrating. And so within the function of the hypothalamus within the endocrine system is to secrete certain chemicals that are going to cause the release of other chemicals in your endocrine glands. What I mean by this is that you have an axis that's formed between your hypothalamus and your pituitary gland. Now, the pituitary gland is going to be the master switch of your entire endocrine system, because it's going to release a type of hormones called tropic hormones, which are going to cause the release of other hormones. So a direct hormone goes directly from the gland to its target, versus a tropic hormone is going to cause the release of another hormone, which will then target the hormone. So this is a indirect way. So you have direct or indirect, which is tropic. So in your hypothalamus, we have certain sensory inputs from our baroreceptors, which are going to be measuring the pressure levels, and you have chemoreceptors measuring the concentrations of dissolved gases. And these inputs are to the hypothalamus are going to tell the hypothalamus what to do for the pituitary gland. So it's going to help to maintain homeostasis for fluid balance, so making sure that your osmoregulation is in place so that you have the right concentration of electrolytes and fluids. And then it's also going to be in charge of a couple of other types of hormones that would cause the contraction of different body parts, which we'll get to in a second. So the main role of the hypothalamus is to understand all of the input that's coming in from the body, all of the feedback, and enact change indirectly through the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland is going to secrete 9 different hormones, and these are going to either be tropic or direct. And the way that it works is that you have 7 hormones that are going to be released that from the anterior lobe or the front lobe of your pituitary gland, because it's going to hang out with these 2 little sacs. So the front sac, the one that's pointing towards your nose, is going to be the anterior one. And then these hormones are going to be abbreviated, or the mnemonic rather, is going to be flat PEG. FLATPEG. And then all the other ones, all others, AO, is going to be in the posterior. So once again, we have flat PEG for the anterior, and we have all others for the posterior. And in a second, we'll get into the different types of hormones, and I'll explain to you what I meant by what I just said. So flat PEG and all others. So going back to this pituitary gland, this is the master switch, and the reason why we call it that is that we are going to be using, we're going to have secretions from this gland that are going to cause secretions of other glands. So this is a control center. So you're going to be able to control the thyroid gland, the reproductive organs, the production of melanin from your melanocytes, which is actually one of the hormones that was not mentioned thus far, and that's actually in the intermediate lobe. So you have the anterior in the front, posterior in the back, and right in the middle of the 2 lobes of your pituitary gland, you have the intermediate, and that's what's going to produce your melanin. So, and melanin, of course, is going to make your skin pigmented, and therefore it'll allow you to protect from these sun rays that are coming in through the window and hitting my skin. So we need UV radiation protection that's provided by the melanin. So the thyroid gland, this is something you guys have probably heard of many times before. The whole purpose of the thyroid gland is to release a couple of hormones that are going to control your metabolism, control your growth, control your bone development, control most of your development. So this is going to be extremely important for homeostasis. And so this is also something that goes wrong. Inferior to your thyroid gland, or actually around your thyroid gland, in the video we were able to see that there are the parathyroid glands. And the parathyroid glands are going to be secreting hormones that are going to be involved in your calcium homeostasis. So the parathyroid hormone is going to change your calcium regulation, and then you have your another hormone, calcitonin, which will have antagonistic effects I don't want to get into hormone names yet and what they do. I'm more concerned about the organs right now first. So next up, you have your adrenal glands. And your adrenal glands, the name adrenal means that they are above the renal glands. So that's what the AD stands for. So what are your renals? Those are your kidneys. So your adrenal glands are directly above your kidneys. And what they're going to be doing is secreting a couple of different types of hormones. And actually each layer of your adrenal glands secretes a different type of hormones. We'll be getting to that in like 2 minutes. So these hormones are going to be involved in your fight or flight response if they are your epinephrine, norepinephrine. And they're also going to be in charge of your fluid balance because you're going to have things like glucocortical minerals. And those are going to be electrolytes, which you also are going to have cortisol being released from your cortex of your adrenal glands. So all of these are going to be important functions of the adrenal glands. And next up, you have your pancreas. And your pancreas has these isolates of Langerhans. And what these isolates do are secrete certain hormones that are in charge of your blood glucose level. So you're going to be able to regulate the blood glucose level by the secretion of glucagon, insulin, and somatostatin. And you have 3 different types of cells that are associated with these 3 hormones in your pancreas's isolates. So your pancreas has alpha cells, which are going to be secreting glucagon. It has beta cells, which secrete your insulin. And then it has delta cells, which releases somatostatin. And what somatostatin does is tell the other 2 to chill out. So your glucagon is going to increase your blood glucose level. Your insulin is going to decrease your blood glucose level. And somatostatin is going to tell glucagon and insulin both that they need to relax. So it's going to stop the secretions of both of those 2 hormones. So we'll get into the pancreas's role as well. And then now you have your secondary organs of the endocrine system. So your heart is actually one of these endocrine glands. And it's going to be releasing a certain hormone that's involved in maintaining your blood pressure level and your blood fluid balance. Also, you are going to have your thymus, which is going to be involved in your immune response. So your thymus is the location in your body where you have your T cells maturing. And this is also going to be the place where you have some of these hormones released that are going to coordinate this whole immune response. Next up, you have many hormones in your digestive tract. Many. You guys are going to have a lot of memorizing to do once you get to the digestive system because you have hormones that help to break down different things. You have hormones that are going to signal that you have an input coming into your digestive tract. So both of them are going to be important. So they're also going to play a part in your glucose metabolism as well as your appetite. So for instance, if you have leptin being secreted, that's a hormone that tells your body that I'm satisfied. Please don't feed me more. The problem with this hormone, it comes 20 minutes late to each of your meals. So what you end up with is you overeat and then 20 minutes later, you're like, damn, I shouldn't have done that. Next, you have your kidneys. And we already spoke about in the blood unit what kinds of hormones the kidneys are going to be secreting that are important for your. I can't quiz you over the internet, or I'm not going to sit there and wait for you to reply. Rather, you have your EPO that's being released by your kidneys, and this is erythropoietin, and it's going to initiate the process of red blood cell production or erythrocyte production. And so that's one of the hormones that it's going to be secreting. The other one is going to actually be associated with your calcium and your phosphate homeostasis. And then you are also going to have a hormone that's involved in your calcium rate, because you have this vitamin, I believe it's D.